I think we could, as there's so few of us, I think we can take this fairly informally down. So do you want to just start off, give a welcome and perhaps an update, and then we can get onto the performance report and tell everyone what's going on.
You want to do the update first?
Yeah, do the update first, I think.
Okay, so things I was going to say is, we're on the big picture future of Epsom and St Helier, the second round of the engagement events that the CCGs are organising started earlier in the week. You went to one?
Yes, on Wednesday I think it was.
And the content is getting more interesting because one of the workstations is the evaluation criteria for how you assess the options to get people's feedback on. I think we're making slow and steady progress in getting the funding organised for the new hospital. So it's got submitted as both London, South West London and Surrey's #1 major scheme in the capital application process. So that is positive. We have got Robert Naylor coming in 2 weeks' time. He is the government's strategic estates advisor to come and have.
Just a lot of land.
But this is about funding of new hospitals as opposed to land sales. So he's coming with his DH team to have a look at that. So that's a good thing. So I think all is on track on big new hospital. In terms of community integration, Sutton Health and Care has been going for 3 months and is doing okay. And we had a board meeting this week and talked about putting more services into Sutton Health and Care, and I think everyone's very receptive to that. On the Epsom Health and Care front, it turns out, Lawrence, that you and I need to go and have lunch today at 12:30 because we have the chief exec and chair of every hospital in Holland has appeared in Epsom to learn about how about Epsom Health and Care because it's become a bit famous.
Are they offering to replace you post-Brexit?
So they're all viewing that, which I found out this morning. I'd kind of forgotten that. The start of the integrated Dorking, Epsom and Elbridge Alliance for Community Services, which was supposed to be the 1st of October, has been put back because of some issues with the contract, but hopefully we'll get there before the end of the financial year. There is a huge amount of capital building work going on in both hospitals currently, some of which we showed some people around last week. There's going to be an announcement shortly of more money for A&E capital, and I'm pretty confident that both Epsom and St Helier are going to have some of it, but it's all embargoed, so I can't say what that is. And I think that's enough.
Yes, I mean, I could just add from a more strategic point of view that the government now and NHS England have published the 10-year plan, which essentially follows on from the 5-year forward view. And the 10-year plan is the thing that supports the extra 22 billion pounds that's been given. I think there's a degree of, I wouldn't say cynicism, that's wrong. I would say let's get on and implement it, is the view of most of the hospital chairs that I speak to. So the plan is very long on what needs to be achieved, but actually you could probably encapsulate that on one page in bullet points, which is, radically improving community health, keeping people out of hospital, not keeping people in hospital only for as long as they need to stay there medically, integrating acute care and social care, all the things that we've all known about for many, many, many years. And I think there's a view that one of the obstacles to implementing the 10-year plan is going to be the current, rather strange, if you look at it from, if you were someone from Holland and looked at it, you would think, why do you have NHS England and NHS Improvement and the Care Quality Commission? Why are these bodies all not part of the old-fashioned NHS? So I think there's going to be quite a lot of pressure actually on changing the bureaucracy. Politicians don't like to do this because to change the bureaucracy that was installed after the Lansley Act, obviously it's going to take time and will be viewed and judged as another top-down reorganisation of the NHS. But I think there's a feeling that it needs to happen because I think there's a general feeling that the Lansley reforms were not successful in that they fragmented things and essentially put one part of the NHS against another because each part has its own targets and budgets, and that tends to drive behaviour. So very interesting, and it's very good that there is a 10-year plan, but the implementation of it I think is going to be quite a challenge. And of course, as you've read in the papers maybe over the last couple of days, the assumptions that have been made centrally about increases in A&E attendance and so on are yet again being shown to be wrong. And the increases
That's what
in
usually happens with these
and the
things.
increases in
isn't it?
A&E attendance, I'm not talking about us, but generally nationally, are much significantly higher than the increase that was forecast. And there's been a lot recently, hasn't there, down about this, about cancer weights, and the position at the moment is worse than it's been for several years.
So nationally it's very difficult, and we can come on ours is holding up at the moment.
Yeah.
But we're seeing the same trend that's happening nationally, which is lots and lots more cancer referrals, but fewer cancers being found as percentage. So the baseline cancers treated is staying roughly stable, and more people are coming in to be checked, which in a way is good.
But that's the right thing.
Yes.
Because the issue for UK cancer mortality being an outlier compared to the rest of Europe is not that we're not detecting cancers, it's that we're not detecting them early enough.
Right.
So the only way of detecting them early enough is to get more people into the urgent treatment referral route as quickly as someone potentially thinks they've got a symptom.
That's right.
So the bit that hasn't then gone right is to say, well, if that's what you want to do, actually you have to have a big step change increase in capacity for diagnostics across the country to make that work. And we haven't quite managed to join up those two things. But it's why, for example, there's now an MRI scanner parked outside St Helier almost permanently, because we need 3 MRI scanners, not 2, to do the work.
Yeah, so one of the things with cancer in this country is that I think it's got the highest rate of detecting cancers in an emergency department. So we don't screen enough, we don't test enough, we don't basically look after the general health of the population well enough at primary level, and so things that turn into emergencies. And that's another absolute clear aspiration of the 10-year plan. We want to start.
The only way they're going to
doing
do that is by training more GPs
Well,
and giving us more than like 5 minutes and be able to get appointments to see
That's
people.
it's another really interesting issue. We found out that where I
Trying
was
to get
yesterday, there was a
an
very
appointment with
senior
somebody is
GP
very
on the
hard.
panel who represents sort of GPs from around the country and was talking about, all the things that are known about the fact they're retiring and that people don't want to be GPs, and a very interesting, if you like, fundamental contradiction that to become a GP, you've got to be, got to be a doctor, you've got to go to medical school for 7 years, you've got to spend a lot of time in hospitals, you've got to do a huge amount of training to be a GP, but actually, without denigrating GPs, a lot of GP work doesn't need that huge amount of training.
Yeah, but
That's
not being
what-
funny,
that's what
Lawrence.
they're now
If you,
saying.
until the patient sees the doctor,
Well,
they can't tell and what's wrong. And if you see someone who's less skilled, then they're going to miss things.
I think the point I was going to make is that we are obviously restrained in terms of resources, both in terms of finance and consequently people. However, there is still stuff that can be done, and the rapid access prostate pathway is an example where if different organisations get together and agree a streamlined pathway of referral, you can actually make earlier diagnoses for patients. So I think we have to, yes, acknowledge the restraints there are, but equally not to be content with the status quo and look to use resource we've got optimally, which is what our clinicians actually.
Anyway, it's the debate that's going on.
Can I just ask a question, please?
Yes.
It's great that there's early detection, but I just wanted to find out the length of wait from detection to actual treatment at the moment in Epsom.
So it's quite difficult to measure because you have the standard measures the 62-day pathway, and then there's a separate, so from data referral to date of treatment, and then there's a separate measure which counts from the point at which you've confirmed there is a cancer to the point at which they're treated, which is called the 31-day standard. And
So
we meet that.
You do meet that?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but what I couldn't tell you is the exact median by specialty of numbers of days, because sometimes it takes a long time to diagnose, but actually you can treat people pretty quickly. Sometimes it's the other way around. But we do meet the 31-day standard, which is that measure of how long.
So we've met every cancer standard since April. So there are three big ones. There's, do you see the urgent referrals within 2 weeks, which we have achieved? It's, do you deliver the treatment standard of that you've been diagnosed with cancer and getting to your definitive treatment within 31 days, and we've been doing that. And do you do the whole pathway within 62 days, and we've done that.
Yes.
So, and in part we've done it. So our big is in urology. So you will have heard us talk about, we're one of the 3 hospitals in the country where you can get your diagnosis done within 24 hours now with this rapid prostate workload. And our urology referrals for cancer as a result of having that in place have gone up by a staggering percentage.
So we were receiving about 60 to 70 GP referrals for urology a month. We hit a peak of over 140 in February, March time. It's dropping back down now to about
90,
a month.
yeah. And we're able, so we've got the capacity to do all of that and achieve the standard. So we're getting positive brownie points from the system for
Why
cancer.
Was there a public education
So there were
campaign
several
or something?
things. So the pathway, the fact that we were offering a more rapid diagnostic pathway, because patients can choose which hospital they want to come to, we seem to have attracted some patients from outside our area because they'd heard about how quickly it was happening or wanted some of that. At the same time, Stephen Fry was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and there tends to be a thing about where well-known people have particular cancer, you tend to see spikes in other people, and that's quite helpful too. So I think those two overlaid each other, and then there's a small bit of, you see a bit more in the winter, and that happened at the same time.
Just curious to know what the government has said their plan to try and improve this record on cancer diagnosis is. Have they got any have they indicated they've got any national plan for doing this?
So I think, as Laurence was saying, a very big part of the new 10-year plan that they're going to publish in November is going to be all about how do we do this.
So we have to wait until then.
And in about 18 months' time, there will be a new cancer standard which will measure the diagnostic time. So at the moment, as Daniel said, there's how long does it take you till you're seen, how long does the whole pathway take, and how long does it take from diagnosis to treatment. In the future, there will be an expectation that everybody is diagnosed by day 28, and that will come in as a new cancer standard, probably in 2020.
Thanks.
Sorry, one more question. Earlier on, I think you mentioned, Daniel, about community integration, Sutton Healthcare, and that there might be more services put in. I just wondered if you could detail what those services might look like.
So the one we agreed this week was that the elderly care consultants at St Helier are going to, from Monday, set up a telephone number where GPs in Sutton can phone them for advice Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, about any patient, and that the advice they give will be entirely linked into the current Sutton Health and Care team. So if the advice is we need to actually send someone to your home to help sort out the patient, rather than the GP having to make a new referral to Sutton Health and Care, we will just put essentially the consultant geriatricians into Sutton Health and Care so they can access the resource that we currently have. And then I think we're also talking about, there's something called discharge to assess. So rather than when someone's an inpatient to work out what they need at home, we try and do the assessment in the hospital, which is quite cumbersome and complicated because you can't really work out what someone's house is like in a hospital ward. So the model of care should be you send the patient home, you do the assessment at home, but clearly that's more complicated because you don't have the wraparound of all the other services in the person's home because you haven't worked out what they are. So under discharge to assess, we take the Sutton Health and Care team to go and provide interim support in the person's home while we do the assessment about what is the long-term care need of that patient. So hopefully that will happen, I hope, before Christmas would be
Aiming to run a trial in the next few months.
pretty good.
And how do you manage in situations where someone's home might be unsuitable or might be contributing to their health
What-
problems? How do you-
Well, so that you clearly have to have a dialogue at the outset about whether you think the person's home could work, because clearly if it is completely unsuitable, you can't do it.
So you would then keep them in hospital until
Well,
you
and
find
just-
alternative.
Yeah, just do the normal assessment process. But the evidence suggests if you do the discharge to assess model at home, you are more likely to get the care levels right and more likely for the person to be able to carry on living in their home than have to go into residential or nursing home. So that's much better care for them.
Except that it doesn't address social isolation issues for people. I mean, what do you do to assess whether they're going to be able to have people coming to see them or be able to get out or anything like that? Because a friend of mine, she's housebound, has been a long time since her stroke. I mean, you just end up, she just sits there watching the television unless people are around. So this is a big part that I'm worried about with all this home care, because it means that people who are housebound are at risk of not seeing anyone apart from their 15-minute carers.
So I think you make a really important point, and actually, you know, what working collaboratively allows us to do is also to look at what role the voluntary sector might play, the role of social prescribing. So I think the fact that we're working in such an integrated way across boundaries, looking at how we deliver care to our older patients means that we are really looking not just at what happens in hospital, but actually where the focus needs to be on what happens from a preventative perspective to actually help older patients avoid needing to go into hospital. And much of that is around how they are supported in the home, and social interaction, as you know, is crucial to that. So there is a lot of discussion and focus not just on the medical bits, but on the wider social aspects that are so fundamentally important too.
Can I just follow on from that lady? You were saying about the voluntary sector and social prescribing. I understand about that, but the CCGs are cutting the funding to the voluntary sector and social prescribing. Now, as some of you know, I'm counsellor and the health and mental health champion for Reigate and Banstead. Reigate down there to Hawley covers, they get social prescribing there. The north of the borough, my area, Banstead and all round there, Chipstead, the CCGs do not fund at all. I'm vice chair of a voluntary sector that covers three boroughs, Epsom and Newell, Mole Valley and Elmbridge, and we are trying to do our own funding, but we are being stopped all the funding. And whilst I do all of this as a volunteer, we do need a few paid staff.
That sounds like a question we should
I think we'll
discuss
take
with
that
Surrey
back to
Downs
CCG.
CCG.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
But
you
also
for that.
we need to bring into the integrating Dorking, Elmbridge and Epsom alliance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Performance report?
Yeah.
So just to go back to the performance report, and as always to pick up really some key points. So if I start with 1.1, which looks at mortality, a strong and assuring position in month in terms of mortality within the trust. If I move on to the second indicator, 1.2, which looks at the safety and effectiveness of our care, you'll see that for stroke, we are still not managing to get our patients to spend the majority of their inpatient stay on a stroke ward. And what I can say is that there's an awful lot of work going on. This is always reported in arrears to actually address the issues and challenges in stroke care. And I can say that since this data set was actually published, the Trust stroke ratings, the SNAP data of the Epsom site has actually significantly improved up to band C. So that's a positive indicator and reflection of a huge amount of work that's going on to look at the stroke pathway. Clearly looking at the capacity we need and making sure we've got the right capacity in the right place is part of that plan. In terms of VTE, we nudge closer to the 95%, and there is a lot of work going on with divisions to actually get that final kind of burst to get us above 95%, which is involving literally going through every single patient that has not been assessed for VTE to determine why, because you need to understand why it's not being completed to really fully enact an action plan. If I move on to 1.3, what I would highlight still is the challenge there has been in completing incident reports in a timely way. It's really important that we learn and reflect from clinical incidents. And in order to address this, we're seeking to change the way we undertake the lower level incident investigations. And I'm pleased that we've been able to entice the National Clinical Director for Patient Safety to come and lead a workshop and discussion in November. So taking her experience of what works well in other trusts, I think, is crucial in driving this forward. So this is an example of where our processes need to change, and we very much recognise that. And then I'll hand over to Arlene for 1.4 onwards.
Thank you. So in terms of 1.4, safety thermometer is a national tool that's used to record new harms for patients in hospital, and our last one was quite high, as in it looks low, but there are a smaller number of patients that didn't have new harm, and that's largely because of a UTI. So it was this summer where we had all the patients coming in quite dehydrated, older patients, and then we put a catheter in, and then they were found to have a UTI. So I think that explains the story for July. We are looking at how we improve this overall to meet the national and peer standards that they have been. And we overall, pressure ulcers is the biggest new harm that we have. And then the UTIs, as I've said. So we are looking at that. In terms of falls per 1,000 days, we are under the CA kind of ceiling, which is quite good, but we have had a number with serious harm, which again we are doing RCAs for those to look into why and how we can prevent those from happening in the future.
And RCAs are
root cause analysis, so investigations. Yeah. Apologies. 1.5, safe staffing. There are a number of metrics that we look at to measure where our staffing is and where we have any issues. And with CHPPD is one of them, which is care hours per patient day, and is calculated over a 24-hour period with patients in bed, at the number of patients in bed at midnight compared to the number of staff that we have. And nationally, in terms of our registered nurses, we do a lot better than the national average. However, this does include spaces like critical care and ITU, where there's one-to-one nursing. So we're looking at how we can separate that out so that we know what the ward is as opposed to those areas that are well staffed anyway. And supervisory status is one of the things we aim to achieve, as in our ward managers being able to be out of the numbers, supporting staff and patients. However, when we don't have enough staff, they get pulled into the numbers and they work with their teams to maintain patient safety. And 1.6, healthcare associated infections. We have the main thing to draw your attention to is the C. diff, where we've had more than we would be wanting to have now. We've had one more than we should do, but we have a new infection control lead nurse, as I've said before, and we're working together to come up with more robust plans to ensure that we can manage that differently and bring our C. diff numbers down. And we have machines now to ensure that we are able to deep clean rooms or use something called BioQuell, which is a chemical that we're able to clean rooms after patients who have been infected have been, and again that helps with keeping the rates down. So we have quite a lot of work going on around that. Two one in terms of maternity. The story in maternity hasn't changed a lot. We are still we are above the targets that we have set in terms of the birth centre for July. However, that might change in the coming months because we have had to close because of lifts on this site. So birth centre, all patients will be going to another to St Helier. That's it. So it's not about mending them. I think this is about changing some of them so that we can have a more reliable. It's not just a breakdown. It's planned work that we're doing.
A regulation, reviewing.
So my understanding is that it will be several weeks before the lift is fixed, which in the longer term will obviously be very helpful that we've got a reliable lift.
More reliable.
It illustrates the challenge that we've got.
So does that mean the birth centre is out of action?
At Epsom.
Yes.
When you say fixed, what we actually mean is we're replacing the lift.
Definitively fixed, yeah.
Yes. And with all our buildings that only have one lift in it, if you take it out of action, you've actually got to move the patients because you can't clearly use it when they haven't got a lift. But
can I just come in on the issue of staffing very, very quickly?
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm from the GMB union, the staffing are our members, and it's not just the nurses actually, it's the contracted staff who are under Mighty, who we've got grave concerns about their treatment at the moment. So I just wanted to raise that in this room because you're the client, obviously. So, we've got concerns about pay mistakes, holiday pay issues, pay mistakes being made. We've got concerns about holiday entitlement, particularly for staff on the previous Agenda for Change contract, not being given, bullying and harassment of staff by some of the managers. So we're going to be meeting with Mighty this afternoon to raise and discuss all of these issues, but I just wanted to raise them here because the morale is very, very low amongst the contracted out workforce in Epsom and St Helier. So we want to work with Mighty to try and put things right, obviously, but I just wanted to raise it because it's across actually wherever Mighty have a contract, we seem to be having all of these range of issues. Pensions, for example, the staff don't even know which pension scheme they're in still. Things are going really, really wrong with this contract.
And have you escalated any of those issues to the estates team here?
Well, we'll meet with them first and we'll see what response we get, and then we'll certainly escalate.
So, because the feedback we've been getting is that when you look at what Mighty have been delivering for us, it's very high standard of service. And whenever I see the Mighty staff, they always seem very happy, smiley and cheery and are joining in. So
I'm telling you that's not the case, that's not what we're hearing, and we're having to meet with them to iron out all of these issues that I've just raised.
Okay.
And have they been brought to partnership forum at all? Because we haven't, in terms of...
Because it's contracted out. So
okay.
But let's find out how that...
That's important.
Yeah, it is.
Have we a date when the birth centre will reopen?
So, as we said, it is likely to be at minimum 7 weeks.
So when does that take us to?
October sometime, end of October, maybe November.
Quite important to have a day.
The work started this week.
This week.
So I think the assumption is if it goes according
End
to
of
plan,
October.
it's 7 weeks from now.
Okay. From that. Okay.
Yes.
Could I just clarify, is the whole of the maternity department in Epsom now closed?
No.
No, just the birth
Just the
centre.
birth centre.
Thank you.
Because it was on a different floor to the rest of the delivery.
Yeah, just
And
wanted to
the other
clarify.
floor has another lift access to it. We should also say on maternity, while we're on it, that in my weekly message today, I'm going to say there was an NHS resolution, which is the litigation arm of the NHS. So when things go completely wrong for a patient and you have to make a payment to them, it's all done through NHS resolution, and we pay an insurance premium to NHS resolution every year. And they've run a scheme for this year which says, we think the whole NHS can reduce the amount of mistakes in maternity that would result in an injury to the mum or the baby if you did this amount of best practice. And they said, if you deliver all the best practice standards, we will give you a reduction in your insurance premium. And they were pretty challenging standards to meet, but we got confirmation this week that we are one of the trusts that has delivered every one of the standards of good maternity care at both Epsom and St Helier, and therefore we have got a reduction in our insurance premium. To give you, so it's about a 10% reduction in the insurance premium, and it's £700,000. So you can see the level of insurance premium that we have been paying for maternity. So that is a really good news story.
That might be a good news story for the trust, but doesn't it strike you as absolutely ridiculous that in what's supposed to be a system, you have to pay one part of the NHS has to pay insurance for another one? Isn't this sort of thing that
the system is unfortunately the system.
But
we have to
kind
pay.
of thing
We have
that
to
we should all be
pay
fighting
capital
against.
charges, depreciation charges,
yeah,
insurance,
it's nonsense.
all sorts of things.
It's the
Litigation
sort of
premium.
thing
We
we
have
need
to
to
pay
be
lots
fighting
and lots of stuff to other parts of the NHS, as does every single trust.
No,
It's the way it works. It's
The way it doesn't work, really.
It doesn't
well,
work.
it's
No,
sort
it
of-
doesn't
I
work.
mean,
It needs
so the money
changing,
does
and
go
it
round
needs
in a bit of a circle.
people like you as well as us to fight against this sort of thing.
The money goes round in a circle.
No, it's
And,
crazy.
the logic for it, they would say, is that it puts the responsibility on you as a trust to try to manage yourself, so
And waste a load
your
of money
payments out
paying
aren't as
people to
high
do these things.
as they might otherwise be. That's the logic behind it. But you're right, it goes around the circle, the system is circle. So it's not-
A couple of things really. Back in the day, the government never used to insure its departments. Their thinking was that would cost a lot of money to do, to insure for the courts, and the government is so big, they can afford to take the risk of litigation.
So that hasn't been the case for medical negligence for decades.
Okay.
So we don't have ordinary insurance for some things like you do if you're a household,
Right.
because that kind of thing is covered.
Okay.
But the medical negligence there's always been a scheme because
Okay.
imagine you're a trust and something goes terribly wrong, and then the payout is tens of millions of pounds
Yeah.
for the family, right? It will make the whole hospital not function if you have to pay it out. So there has been a national insurance scheme that everyone has to participate in for a long time.
But it would only affect the individual hospital if the individual hospital was being treated like a business rather than a public service.
Yeah.
But coming on to another point, was your premium not affected by the fact that you've just lost 2 court cases that cost you a lot of money? So I hear.
So I don't know which court cases you're referring to, but
Okay.
the premium is for the trust is set every year
Right.
based on the historic trends in how much money the trust has had to pay out because it made mistakes. So it is true when you look at our finances, our premium has gone up hugely in recent years. And the historic thing is quite hard because most of these cases, when they are settled, are from events that happened 5-10 years ago. And when you look at the number of new cases that we are generating where things go terribly wrong, it's actually come down a lot. And you can see the more investment we make in safe staffing, the less mistakes overall are happening that are really serious.
You're right, Sandra, in that the premium is decided on what happens at the end of a particular court case. And as Daniel has said, it takes, or it can take, 5, 7, even 10 years for a court case to be finished. So we will be paying now for things that happened back 10 years ago.
So the patient experience metrics are broadly similar to normal, so should we just move on to the access ones?
So for cancer, which is the first one, as Dan has mentioned, we've met the 3 key national standards of 2-week waits, decision to treat first treatment, and 62 days for GP referral to treatment. What I would highlight is if you look on the right-hand side is the graph which shows the number of patients being referred in every month. And what you can see is a huge spike in cancer referrals in April, May and June. And we're seeing that going into July and August as well. And that's concentrated in a small number of specialties, but particularly lung, urology, lung, lower GI, and particularly dermatology. And we're seeing a huge number of dermatology cancer referrals coming in to the point where some of them are almost outstripping our normal monthly referrals. It's a really good achievement for us to hit the 62-day standard across the last 3 months. We're one of the few trusts in the country that's been able to do that, and we've also confirmed this week we've achieved July as well. So the trends for cancer are really positive at the moment. If we move on to elective care over the page, the percentage has dropped from 87.7% in June to 87.3%, which is the number of patients waiting under 18 weeks at any one time. The reason for that is because we've been so successful in reducing patients off our waiting list overall. And rather sadly, that has tipped the balance, which has caused my personal performance to drop very slightly. But in doing that, we've been doing the right thing in that we're holding our backlog and we're treating people and removing them from the waiting list. So there's a slight statistical anomaly on here, but the overall direction of reducing the waits and reducing the overall list, we're still achieving against. Our outpatient waiting time has dropped, so we're now seeing fewer people in under 10 weeks. And again, that's because some of the capacity has been soaked up by our cancer patients that we would expect to see on normal referral pathways.
Just meant the opposite of what you said.
So it has dropped number of waiting over 10 weeks, and that is largely because we've had so many cancer referrals that we've had to see quickly. And I think that's slightly skewed the statistics over the last month or two, and I think we'll see something similar for August. In terms of diagnostics is the one area that's been a particularly difficult month for July, and that is in 2 areas, as Daniel's alluded to, MRI, and then also in musculoskeletal ultrasound. In ultrasound, that's because we've had a delay in one of our consultants joining us, and that has meant we've had a gap in our staffing, and we're confident we're now putting that right, probably for September. But the MRI capacity is a significant issue because so much time has been soaked up in high demand, short notice cancer pathways, and we're just trying to review the amount of time we need. As Daniel's alluded to, we've been having a scanner on site 4 days a week now to smooth some of that out, and I'd expect us to return to normal in the month of September's reporting. A small number of cancelled operations who we were unable to fit in, and that's for all reasons. That can be patient not fit, that can be unavailable on the day, or even patient choice, but there is a small number and that's going in the right direction. The bit I would highlight at the bottom in referrals is that our referrals have been broadly flat over the last couple of months, but more and more have been coming in as 2-week waits, and more have also been coming in electronically. The 66% you see for e-referrals there is for an average for all of July. By the end of July, we were at 90%, and we're now nudging 95% of our referrals coming in electronically, and we're one of the best trusts in London, so there's a real achievement there for that. Over the page for urgent care, we've achieved the 4-hour standard in July, and we've also achieved it in August, we confirmed this week. And in terms of our minors breaches, so some of you will remember we've been set a challenge to reduce the number of patients who are streamed into minors to 0. We've been able to hold the number of breaches down to a low number, but what we're seeing is that happens in spikes. So it may well be, for example, where a particular member of staff has been unable to fill a shift, or somebody is ill, and therefore you lose some of that capacity, and therefore the minors patients, you have to treat people in order of clinical priority, and the minors tend to wait. And we're just trying to work out whether we can do something different with our staffing structures to address some of those gaps. In terms of stranded patients, you'll see the number has kicked up very slightly in July. Again, that's because the number is a snapshot on the last day of the month. We've been tracking our numbers over the last 6 weeks for stranded, so that's people who've been in the hospital for 7 days and those who've been in hospital for 21 days for all reasons. And our numbers are now coming down throughout August and September, which is again against the trend in London. So whilst that looks like a blip, I think it really is a blip, and our trend is downwards in line with the direction we've been set. Some of that is about delayed transfers of care, and what we're now finding is that this is often a smaller number of highly complex patients rather than an indication of generalised delays with social services. And as Daniel's alluded to, we're going to try and do some different things in terms of the way we discharge patients. And I think that would be better, and social services are very strongly supportive of that as well. Ambulance arrivals, they've dropped slightly, but we've increased the number we've been able to see within 30 minutes. And the build programmes we have on both of our emergency sites for this winter, I think will give us more capacity to offload ambulances and further reduce those delays, which is a good thing both for the patients we see here, but also frees up the ambulances to go back out into the system, which has been a key driver of that programme. I'll probably pause there, but you can see on the final graph for handovers, the number of waits in total has dropped markedly, and that's due to some fairly focused work.
Quickly do workforce. So the trend is continuing where our vacancies are coming down slightly. The number of clinical staff we have has gone up slightly. We're getting closer to reducing our agency spend to the trajectory we have been set, and staff turnover is broadly flat. Arlene's been working really hard with the heads of nursing, and we're going to have a massive recruitment drive for healthcare assistants between now and Christmas. When you see the data for the next month, for August, we have recruited a huge number of doctors for the August rotation. And so our vacancy in medical staff has come down a lot. And we're about to go and present what we've done in recruitment to the Royal College of Physicians, because we've made some really interesting ideas about how to attract people to come work for us. So that's the workforce bit. Comms bit is same as normal, and on the money, we have delivered the deficit that we had been set each month now for April, May, June and July, and the only reason why we are showing that we're slightly adverse is because there is a element of the money which relates to delivery of the A&E performance, and our A&E performance hasn't been good enough, despite the fact that we're still the third best in London, to trigger the bonus payment, because our bonus payment is set at a really high percentage relative to other trusts. So we're about £600,000 behind as a result of not getting the quarter one A&E payment. We are currently on track for quarter two, so we have to deliver 95% in the whole of quarter two to get it, and I think we're at 94.98 after yesterday. So we're within spitting distance of getting the whole of the quarter two payment, so that will be good news.
Is that because they work out that you have to do the same performance this year as you did the previous year?
You have to do better.
You just do.
Better.
Is that all you have to do,
So-
by 0.1%?
So if you were at 90, you either have to do 95% standard, or you have to do 90% or better than last year.
Or better than
Yeah,
last year.
and
So
so-
if you were one of the trusts that's down in the 70s, you have to, if you do 71, you get the money.
It could be that they've all got individual settings, so it could be that, or it could be you have to deliver 90. But what you don't have to deliver is 95. And we're in the place that we have to deliver 95 every quarter, because in the past that's what we've been able to do. So essentially, we have the hardest target of any hospital in South London to achieve for A&E. Yeah, so you could say it's not really.
So you're penalised for doing well in the past.
So you could say that, yes.
No, it sounds like you're stupid as well.
It's right thing from
But it's the right way to achieve it. And of course, we got a lot of STF money
But
at the end of last year for achieving.
patient care on
And
you,
the
'cause you
trust
can't
that
get that money.
didn't achieve their target
Yeah.
didn't get any
Yeah.
STF money. So you could say that there is an argument to say that the trust that didn't achieve their targets were trying very hard and needed the money so that they could achieve their targets. So it's just another example of the way
Crazy
that
stupidity.
things are managed at the moment. The system is the one we have to live with, but it is interesting, and you can make a case anyway. So take a couple more points, and then we'll get onto the reports from.
On
people
staffing,
Yes.
we're starting the autumn. I know you've all the hospitals had a bad summer. Are you going to be able to cope with the winter time? I'm only that I have a daughter-in-law that's in A&E and has worked in A&E in London Hospital for the last, 11, 12 years. And last year, Boxing Day was, I know it was everywhere, but she said she has never, ever, I mean, they were all working at least 12, 14 hours, and it's getting worse. However, whatever plans you put in, you can't cope with it. And sort of seeing it from the other side, as all my family are doctors, so I understand the pressures you're under, but I also get it from patients, because someone came in from my area Boxing Day and complained for waiting. Well, I had to count to 20 before I dare reply, having known what pressures you're all under.
Dan, do you want to?
So if I just start with some context, then I'm probably not the right person to talk about the workforcey bits, but I can probably contribute. So I and my wife, who's an ED consultant, worked last Boxing Day, and I can tell you how difficult it was.
Yeah.
Some of that was the unique factors of last winter, and I think it was recognised as a uniquely difficult winter. Some of Boxing Day was because it was the fourth non-working day on the bounce, and therefore you don't have as much social network support, you have families away, it's more difficult to discharge people on non-working days. So the 4 of them on the bounce is quite difficult. And every hospital in London and outside found exactly the same thing. And if I can partly answer your question, so this winter presents us with an even greater challenge in that we have a weekend, a single working day, which is Christmas Eve, 2 bank holidays, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, 2 working days, and then a 3-day weekend. So we are now working with our social partners to work out how it is we can keep all of those services running, to make sure that what we don't find is that people don't work Christmas Eve because it's one day, and you end up with an unintentional 5-day bank holiday and then a 3-day bank holiday the next week. We've got to plan that very, very carefully, not in terms of our own staff, because that's difficult at the front door, but if we don't make the discharge process work, one of the reasons A&E is difficult is because you have exit block from the departments to the rest of the hospital. So I think our difficulties over this winter and last winter will very much come about as our ability to discharge patients from the hospital in a safe manner. And I think we've talked about some of the things we're trying to put in place to help that, as well as how we plan our staffing numbers. And that might involve some difficult conversations about what we do with our elective activity to free more of our clinical staff up to work on non-elective pathways. But there's only so much you can do if you can't discharge patients from the hospital, and that will require a whole system approach rather than just something the hospital does. I think the workforce bit is probably better. There may be others better placed to answer than me.
I mean, I think Dan's made the point I was going to make, which is around we're planning now. So we're planning now for the specifics of it's a winter plan. In fact, the winter plan now stretches for a longer period of time than it used to. But also, as Arlene articulated earlier on, we're also planning in terms of seeking to recruit staff ahead of the peak operational pressures actually kicking in. And there's a very strong plan that's emerging about how we recruit particularly to nursing and HTA posts. Medical staff, I think we have been fortunate with some innovative thinking in that our position is now very much stronger. So it's a multi-pronged approach, get the right staff into the right jobs, innovative solutions to working practices, and plan and micromanage the Christmas and New Year period so that we can keep our patients safe and be as responsive as we can to what we know is going to be a busy time of year.
I mean, you're saying it yourself, aren't you? Fundamentally, it's a staffing issue, there's a resource issue, and I've certainly noticed that when I've gone around St Helier Hospital, every single ward I went on, there's not enough nurses, there's a resounding response. It was quite shocking, actually, and I could see myself that the wards were very, very short-staffed, even just a month ago, you know, so I just think to myself, what plans are there to kind of retain staff?
So as Ruth and Daniel have said, I am working with the heads of nursing to look at staffing from both ends, getting the right numbers in, but also strengthening the leadership on the wards, because I think that's part of the issue that we have as well. So our fill rates, as you'll see in the IPR, in the performance report, is a lot better than it has been before, or is continued to be really good. So we're looking at how we can entice some of the agency nurses that work with us as well to take up permanent posts, so that we can build the numbers that way. The unregistered nursing campaign that we will start next week is really all about getting more hands on the ground, so that we can release the registered nursing staff to do what only they can do. And then we're looking at new roles as well. So we have the nursing associate roles and we have apprentices, but we're also looking at other admin roles, so discharge coordinators, for instance, based on every ward. So again, they will just focus on the discharge element so that we can actually get the patients out, because the nurses are concentrating on delivering care. So we're doing several things at the same time to try and sort that out.
So just one bit to add on to that before we move on. So our strategy has been for the last few years, recruit as many people as you conceivably can, because that way you reduce your temporary staffing spend. So we've still got 300 odd clinical vacancies in the trust, and we are actively trying to work out how we can reduce it. So we're not putting money first, we're putting patient safety first by saying the way we get better patient safety is have more staff, and having more staff will then help sort out the money.
It sounds to me a little bit like you're kind of saying we have to discharge patients more quickly, and that's sort of the solution. That's what's kind of coming across.
So there is a real thing about you only want to be in hospital when you're ill. If you don't need, so there's the word is appropriate. You want the appropriate length of stay so that you can get, you want to be better medically. But you ideally want to do your rehabilitation and convalescence in a place that is not an acute hospital bed, because for most people that is not the right place to have that element of your care in, and that's not appropriate. So that's the bit we are concentrating on, is how do you get the convalescence reablement done in the most appropriate setting for that particular person. And for most people it's not in an acute hospital bed, it's in their home, it's in a community facility, it's in a part of a hospital we create to be a community facility, but it's not the acute hospital ward. Should we move on to different questions?
No, we'll continue this for a couple of minutes, and then we'll get a report back from the visits to the wards. But so, David, yeah. Okay.
Just quickly adding on to what Dan has said, I think the patients or the public have a part to play in this. If that was explained generally how it's going to work with the bank holidays, the days off and the staffing, there'll be a lot more tolerance coming from the public and people who have an elective operation plan which has to be put back would be more understanding.
So we need to work through the detail of that, and then we can tell people.
But I think that needs to be out there up front.
But it's that realisation, let's start working on this now in September, how we get through. And for me, Christmas is a 3-week evolution. When you take into account people's school holidays, when people are likely to return, I think just planning for that bank holiday series is about 3 weeks of what is going to happen on every single day, and how are you going to prioritise between the elective and the non-elective, and then how do you work with our social care partners, families, as Daniel has said, to make sure that only the patients who absolutely need our help are in our hospital. And I think if we can work with partners, etc., we will do.
Okay, I understand that there are pressures on beds, and there are pressures on beds throughout the country, and apparently throughout the year. Is there any sense in your plans to reduce the number of beds, as is being done again all over the country? Bed numbers are being reduced while more and more crises are erupting because there aren't enough beds. It seems that we should be keeping at least the number of beds, if not increasing them, until you've got all that other stuff lined up. And it doesn't appear to be lined up because we're still having crises all the time. And my other point is that you are having trouble recruiting. Do you think you might have a bit less trouble recruiting staff if you stop trying to close the hospital? Because staff are not going to want to come and work here while you're threatening to remove acute services from one or other of the hospitals in your trust.
So let me just start with the last bit, because I find this really difficult. Right? So we recruited consultant anaesthetists this week, and every one of the applicants asked me in advance, what is the future of Epsom and St Helier? Because if you tell me, Daniel, you're not going to end up with a brand new hospital at the end of it, we do not want to come and work for you. Because the senior clinical workforce can see that what we currently have is not sustainable. And if you're saying to them, come and work here for 20 years and work in an environment that isn't acceptable and on rotas that are really require a massive amount of goodwill to keep going because we haven't got enough people on each rota to actually make it work, they say, no, thank you. If you're saying to me, you think there is a realistic probability that we can get to an acute specialist facility for the really sick patients, I want to be part of it. And because I was able to say that, we only had 2 jobs. We recruited 3 consultants. And so it is your talk of saying we are closing the hospital, which is actually causing the issue. Our talk of we're trying to secure hundreds of millions of pounds to build a new acute facility.
A new acute facility
is
not a hospital.
Is the thing that is so the place that is hardest to recruit to is in the acute services, because that's the bit that absorbs the most manpower. That's the bit where you have to have the right decision makers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it is those people who are the most short supply in the NHS. So the vision that we have is what is actually attracting people to come and say, we want to come here because we can see that you're going to do something great in the future. Please tell me that is what's going to happen.
With fewer beds in one location.
And then you get onto the bed issue. And the model we are proposing is to have broadly the same number of beds in the future as we currently have.
Broadly the same number of acute beds.
And so so this is where you get into the definition of a bed, right? Yeah. And the definition of a bed says it's called general and acute. And when you add up the number in Epsom and St Helier, it fluctuates between 900 and just over 1,000, depending on which day of the week it is, right? If you use the same definition of bed in the future, general and acute, we will have broadly the same number of beds in the future as now. And when you look at the performance report, and we're now having to focus on this cohort of patients called super stranded, at the beginning of this year, we had about 200 patients who were more than 21 days in Epsom and St Helier hospitals. So more than 3 weeks of care 200 people are having. And you look at that cohort of patients, you think, how many of those patients actually needed to be in an acute hospital? And the answer is not very many. We've already got the super stranded patients down to 140. How much is it? Just tell me the number. 130. 128 yesterday. And as a result of that, do you know we've got two wards that are not open at St Helier, and we've got some beds that are not open at Epsom. So what we're doing by really focusing on the patients with a long length of stay and saying, how do we actually collectively work together to get you into the appropriate place for your rehabilitation, using all the resources we've now got in Sutton Health and Care and Epsom Health and Care, so that the care is appropriate and is safe in people's homes. We have less super stranded patients. That is creating us the capacity for the winter when we're going to have more sick patients. So I think we are, in Epsom and St Helier, a really good example of how you can deliver integrated care and keep more people at home and reduce length of stay and do it safely, and then have the capacity for the winter. So when you look at our performance since April as a hospital compared to nearly every other hospital around us, we have done more planned care, we have achieved the A&E standard, and we have less capacity now than we did, and we're able to do all the work safely. And that's because we're beginning to get it really right for the frail elderly people who need an acute episode of care and then rehabilitation, and the huge number of people who need planned care. So I think we're actually doing quite well at the moment of getting care right with the resources, and I'm more and more confident that the model that we're putting on the table for the future about separating out the acute beds from the rehabilitation and convalescence beds is exactly the right thing to do to have great care for our community.
Well, just for the sake of anyone else in the room that wasn't there when you and I had a conversation, you told me a couple of things. You said that in acute care you would have people there for 3, maximum 5 days. And I said to you, surely there are lots of cases of younger people who will not be fit to be discharged after 3 or 5 days in acute beds. And you said, believe me, we will discharge them. And you also told me that you envisage the 200 beds that are counting towards your 1,000, still having 1,000 beds, 200 beds in St Helier would be only for old people being having rehab care. So what you're looking at is a glorified nursing home on our St Helier, and you're counting that instead of the 2 acute hospitals that we've currently got.
So you could say now that some of our elderly care wards at St Helier are a glorified nursing home. Right? So if you go and look at what happens on A5 and A6, so one's a long stay women's elderly care ward and one's a long stay elderly care male ward, and you think, actually, we haven't got this right, because we're treating these patients as if they're acutely unwell, when actually what needs to happen on that ward is it needs to become a therapeutic rehabilitation environment about how do we get you fit quickly. And so we're in the process of completely changing the ethos of how the wards work, because those wards have lengths of stay of more than half the patients have been there more than 3 weeks. And you think, this isn't right for these people.
I'm talking about the 50-year-olds that have had a car crash and need to be in hospital for more than 3 to 5 days, which you told me categorically you would discharge.
So the 50-year-olds who's been in a car crash would have gone to St George's, because that would be major trauma. And then what happens in the major trauma pathway is and it's a good one, because you have your acute treatment at St George's, and then you come back to us for your rehabilitation. And all we're saying is, we're going to do the same model for lots and lots of different types of medical illness. Exactly that.
But you told me only older people would go into rehab.
So in true Sandra Daniel language, I think I gave you a more nuanced answer, and you've made it more binary than...
Not at all, not at all. It's the only difference is it was you and me talking and weren't being witnessed by other people.
Right, we're going to move on because I want to get...
Yeah, short point.
Okay, I'm going to come back at the end because we're going to get 15
Very
minutes.
short and it's relevant to this. So.
Go on then, 15.
What do you do when things go wrong regarding discharging people too early? For example, my elderly friend who was in hospital, discharged when she was still dizzy, fell down the next day, broke her hip, straight back in hospital again. What do you do in those circumstances? Because, it's clearly not going right all the time.
So in that situation, we're constantly looking at our readmission rate to make sure that we're looking overall at trends of readmissions, and where we are cited on become aware of situations such as you describe, we would actually investigate what happened and what we need to do differently to prevent that from happening again in the future.
And increasingly, when we're sending people home with packages of care from Sutton Health and Care and Epsom Health and Care, it's our staff who are assessing people, can they actually cope in their homes? And if the answer is they can't, then we have to bring them back.
Physically not well to be going home, she was busy, so why was she sent home?
So as Ruth says, sometimes we don't get it right, but when you look at the number of people who get readmitted, it's coming down. So I think we're getting it more right.
Can I make a comment? As we are speaking, there's an audit underway where clinicians from the Trust and GPs are looking at a series of patients who have been readmitted within a 4-week period of their discharge, so that they can explore what reasons have underpinned those readmissions and what lessons can we collectively learn to try and prevent that happening in the future. So it is very valuable information.
Because a broken hip is a dangerous situation. It should never have happened.
So I can't comment on the individual case, but it is important that we learn from every time when people are readmitted in an avoidable way. We've clearly got it wrong between us and the system.
Right, I'm going to ask for a report back on the visits, and I'll start with Ian and Chris, who I think went to Tutor Eve with James.
You better come up to the front.
Yeah.
You want to start or?
You better come
you're
to
on your feet, so I'll stand up.
No, but you need to come to the front because you're on camera if you come to the front.
Over here or here?
Just face that way.
Face that way. So this is, I'm Chris Elliott. I'm new to the board. This was the first time I've done one of these 15 steps. It was very interesting. First thing I want to say is I was impressed with the way I thought, I'm going to interrupt people, they're working and so on. Actually, that people were very open and friendly and were very, whether they were happy, I don't know, but they were very polite about being interrupted. It was clear that we went to Shooter Eve ward, which is an acute medical unit, which takes a lot of admissions. It's obviously a very busy unit with quite a high patients not staying very long, either being discharged home or moving on to other wards in the hospital. It did feel to me quite physically cramped as a ward. there weren't nice open spaces. There were lots of people there. So, you know, every time somebody wanted to move, you normally had to sort of say, "Excuse me," to get past someone else. Having said that, it felt a very friendly ward. I talked to a patient who'd been in a few days, was hoping to go home soon, and she said that she'd found it very friendly. The care she'd had was very good, very responsive. She wasn't somebody who could move around very easily, and whenever she pressed the button, someone came to her quickly, which I know is a concern at times. So I was glad to hear that at least for her that had worked very well. She didn't complain. She said, "I'm not. This isn't a complaint. It's just the way it is that because of the amount of stuff that goes on the ward 24 hours a day, she found sleeping very difficult. So she hadn't slept well." I had a talk with a nurse who again described as being very busy, but that the wards, people got on well with the ward, and she was happy with the team there. I went and had a talk to a hospital pharmacist, and what encouraged me was he felt that he was part of the ward team, because we know that a lot of patients get prescribed a lot of medication these days. It's therefore quite easy if you're not being mindful to make mistakes in what you prescribe, or not to prescribe things in a way that's more difficult for patients to take. So having a pharmacist who can feel that they're part of the team and can head off any mistakes that might happen, I thought was very encouraging, and he had a clear idea about what to do if he did find something he wasn't content with. So that was my little summary.
Right, and I suppose things to add. So on a positive, so we went there, the board was very busy, but there was a I think, calm efficiency about it, you would say. Lots of junior trainee medical staff, and I think it must be about the only ward in the NHS that's actually got adequate numbers of medical staff at that level. And the nursing staff were clear that if they need a doctor to see a patient, they've got access to them quickly. So that was good. Nursing staff clearly very challenged in terms of establishment. They're usually below establishment and trained staff, and having to cover more patients than would be ideal. I spoke to one chap, a nurse who'd been recruited from India to come and work here. He just started working here this year. He was going to be here for 3 years. He was having a sufficiently positive experience. He was planning to stay in the trust. But he observed that with the number of patients he's got to look after, if somebody becomes particularly sick, then he's not got enough time for the rest. So the nursing staff are spread too thin, and I think there's a degree of stress being experienced by the nursing staff because of that, and they alluded to that it's actually quite a difficult place to work. But they didn't feel it was unsafe, and on one occasion alluded to actually getting the matron to come and work to concerns that been raised. We spoke to one of the consultants who was on duty today, and the consultants there do short periods of work during the week, so 2 or 3 days, and the consultant care just seemed a little fragmented and with no direct consultant to consultant handover. So that's something that for me seemed a bit difficult in terms of continuity. Spoke to 2 patients who were very happy. One elderly lady who clearly has been admitted to Epsom on a number of occasions and said she's got real confidence in the team and there wasn't anything she wants to change. Another chap who'd been repatriated here, having had problems when he was on holiday, he said how much he appreciated the NHS when he'd been in a hospital elsewhere. He said there was a feeling that the place was very busy and a bit chaotic, but that the team did as well as they could in what are challenging circumstances, and he was happy.
I've got a couple of additional observations. So I think we've mentioned before in feedback about tutoring that the environment is quite difficult. It feels cluttered. The floor's patchy. I think I've reinforced the medical staffing actually looked very good, but I take your point about the handover. We spent quite a long time talking to one of the consultants who talked us through the various handovers that happen in the day, but there isn't a structured consultant to consultant handover. I spent some time, Arlene, having a chat with some of the nurses. So I spoke with the matron who was on the ward, the staff nurse and the healthcare assistant. And they were under their rostered staffing today. I think they're struggling to have enough nurses on the unit, and I think it just feels to be a recurrent theme. And there was a nurse who'd been qualified for a year, and I think she found that when she did bank shifts on other wards, it felt as though she could deliver the type of personalised care that she wasn't able to deliver on the acute medical unit, because she was so busy that she was dealing with the tasks, but she felt she didn't have enough time to do the important patient one-to-one conversations and care that she'd like to offer in a more personalised way. So I think the feedback that I received was that she felt that it was safe, but that she didn't feel that she could fulfil her full nursing responsibilities. So I did feedback that I'd ask you to look at whether we've got the baseline rostering levels right, and I'm sure you're aware that actually the fill rates are quite challenged on that unit. On a more positive level, I spoke to a nurse who had worked at another hospital in Surrey, where she said, I said, well, what's different with the ward you're working at there compared with here? And she said, well, it feels to me as though the staffing levels are similar, but here there seemed to, she was saying, I feel that I can moan about it, whereas where I worked before, I was told to get on with it. So I'm not saying that's great, but at least there's a positive culture where she felt that she could escalate her concerns.
Thanks very much. Very good. So now it's Martin and Pat and Peter who went to Alex's ward.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Martin Kirk. I'll just be brief, 3 points to start off with. On the positive side, the staff that we spoke to, we asked if there was anything that they wanted the board or the public to know, because we explained the process, and they didn't have anything in particular that they wanted to raise. And then asking further about how morale was and how staff were feeling. Again, the ones that we spoke to, it was positive. There were a couple of other things that we noticed. As we went in, the hand sanitisers, the first 2 were empty, the 2 most obvious ones that you'd use as you go. We went round the corner and did find one which was full. When we questioned about this, it was because the ward had been closed yesterday for fumigation following a C. diff outbreak, and they were taking time to fill things up, but I think you could challenge that, and that's the 2 first things that you want to fill up. The other one for me was, and it's probably a more general point that I hadn't noticed before, was that some staff have got bright yellow badges, which I think it's typically nurses, which say, hi, I'm whoever. And then after that there's a whole variety. In fact, one of the doctors that we spoke to, other than the fact he had a stethoscope around his neck, the patient wouldn't have known it actually was a doctor. And when we asked him about that, he said at his previous trust there was a policy to not have lanyards because of infection control. So I'll leave that with my colleagues who know far more about these things. But it did strike me that even where doctors have got it and then you've got the pass, realistically you can't actually read what it is. And it would probably be a small kind of cultural thing and good for patient engagement if perhaps everybody simply had something that you could really read with their name on it.
And this is an elderly care ward, elderly care female ward. And I think the badges you're talking about, Martin, were black on yellow, which I think is the dementia friendly. So it probably on that ward it's more relevant than it might be elsewhere. Yes, I sat in on the whiteboard meeting, which is when the multidisciplinary team goes through the patients on the ward, which was very well attended. It had physio, it had social worker, it had nursing staff, and was run by the doctor. The thing that was notable from that was issues with discharge. There were quite a number of patients on the board who'd been there, well, one patient I spoke to had been there 44 days, but there were some who'd been there 70 days. I mean, this is, that's too long. And I mean, we're back to all the issues that you were talking about earlier, and there were discussions about whether some of it was to do with the package of care not being in place, but there were other things too, because these are frail elderly ladies, and clearly they've sometimes been ready for discharge and then something had deteriorated and they weren't. So I think it's a very difficult issue, and also you've got family issues about the care in addition to any package that a family can offer. So it's clearly an extremely challenging issue, but then it was a concern to see so many on the list of patients who've been there a very long time. I spoke to one elderly lady, 95, who had been in for 44 days, and sometimes it's quite difficult, and I did ask to look at for one of the doctors to see whether what she was telling me was entirely accurate, because she was confused about where she'd been yesterday, and I then discovered that she obviously had been somewhere else because the board had been decanted. She obviously moved somewhere else briefly. But she talked about being prepared for discharge, so she was, and having visits from physios, and I think it must be very difficult for the staff when a patient says, I haven't seen a physio, but actually when she came in, she was not mobile in the first place. So she's, these are daily problems for the staff. But the staff were extremely responsive, and when I talked, I did notice that in one bed there was a lady who didn't have a call bell nearby. It was actually on the wall in the little socket. But the nurse who I spoke to said, it's not my patient, but I should have spotted it, which I thought was a very good response, and immediately went over and moved the call bell down, and then went round the bay to make sure that all the other call bells were within reach, which I thought was excellent, particularly as I understood she'd come from another ward. It wasn't a ward she was familiar with either. So there was some. So I thought that was a very good example of a responsive member of staff.
So I think the only thing I want to add really was that clearly there was a lot of activity going on, but it felt very calm. The patients I spoke to said that they were getting all the help and support they needed. Some of the staff were, we talked about the nurse in charge about if the ward's short, what do they do, and there was clearly a sense of that the nurse in charge was getting the support she needed from the matron, because the ward manager was off at the moment. But they were one person short down on their complement that day, and obviously they've had someone come from another ward to help out. So making that team effort effective and sort of all pulled together is at times challenging when there's a lot of activity going on at the same time. But overall, good patient feedback, calm and clearly now clean.
Thanks very much. I think the point about lanyards and infection control must be not correct, because we've had them for about 4 years now, and our infection control rate hasn't gone shooting up because of lanyards.
No.
So, I really would encourage everyone to make sure that all doctors, in fact everybody, wears the lanyard. It's really important from a patient perspective to know who's who.
Yeah, absolutely. And some organisations say it's about infection control. I think it's just choice. We have discussed it as part of the infection control committee and made a conscious decision that we will use them, so that it's more important to have staff identified, so that patients know who they are, and it's just about ensuring that it's tucked away if we're delivering patient care.
Right, we've got about another 5-10 minutes, so just a few final questions.
Hello. Thanks, Chair. Going back to the financial performance, I find this figure's a bit baffling to be hopefully not meant to be, but on the top page 3333, while these are income and expenditure for PSF, we have a year-to-date figure of minus 26 million. 339,000, and that, you say that's fine, that's within target. The year previously you had a total of minus 27 million, and this year you're hoping to produce a deficit of 28.2 million at the end of the year. I did notice that you have a sudden jump in February of next year, where you seem to have a lot of money coming in. Wouldn't be anything to do with the land sales by any chance?
It would, yes.
Bingo! So that's why you're not particularly worried about this particular figure then?
Well, the figure is, as you can see, the lines are actually pretty well on budget. So this is how we budgeted the cash coming in for this current year.
But you're already more than 90% at your year-end target.
Yes.
Yes.
So you can see that the land sale is a big amount of money.
Yeah. But this is not sustainable, is it?
No. So we have been set a deficit to achieve that is not possible to achieve without a non-recurrent something to get there. And
this will happen next year.
Well, no. Then we'll negotiate a different. We'll have to negotiate a different deficit. If we don't have one-off receipts, we will be quite clear and upfront with our regulator that we do not have any one-off receipts coming up next year, and therefore we will hopefully agree a different budget.
Well, is this more the triumph of hope over experience?
The experience is that we've met or beaten our budget for the last 4 years. So experience tells us
you might be given the same target.
So we might. So you could be right. This could be hope over experience, because we didn't really have much choice about negotiating the deficit we were set for this year. It was pretty much told, this is what you have, and if you don't agree with it, then we're going to do not so nice things to you. Is the general gist of it. So
we are in Russia after all.
So because the whole NHS has to balance that, and we're a component of it. So
it doesn't. To be honest with you, it doesn't give me a great deal of confidence. This particular approach, because it assumes that every year you're going to have to make some sort of sale of assets in order to meet your operating costs.
We have every year what we have to do is make a very significant amount of cost savings, which we have done by and large for the last 4 or 5 years. It's always a question of how much you can continue to make cost savings, but we have done it, and they're embedded in here. But yes, I mean, as Daniel says, the NHS as a system has to balance, and the way the system works is that they will give us a figure for next year where they expect us to land. We will then have discussions with them, and they do listen, they do understand, and we will agree the figure for next year. This year, and indeed last year, there are some trusts that have failed to agree. Their boards just could not accept the figure they were given, and after negotiation, they couldn't reach an agreement. So those trusts have not agreed and not signed up to a control total. What that means is that they are therefore immediately ineligible for any of the bonus payments which have been received by this trust for the last 2-3 years. So if you don't agree, you get punished at one end. If you do agree, you get a budget which you hope to meet.
So by selling off a fifth of your hospital? Yeah. How many times can you do that? But it's our fault that it's campaigners' fault that you can't recruit, but you're selling off a fifth of your hospital this year, and might have to do it again next year. Who are you blaming here for your problems you're facing?
So we're not going to blame anybody. We could be moving to a different financial system from next April. There are conversations about it. It will be very interesting to find out how that works in the context of, in the Surrey system, both us and the CCG have a huge deficit, and in the Sutton system, the CCG has a smaller deficit, but we have a deficit as well, about how we work out what is an appropriate deficit for the system. Because no matter how you spend the extra 3.4% that the government have put in for the NHS for next year, it is not going to sort out all our deficits. Because the deficit is way bigger than 3.4% of the budget. So the thing that you need to take assurance from is that in all the things that we do to ensure that we deliver our control total, we do nothing that impacts on patient safety and quality. Every time we want to make a change, we have a different group of clinicians who assess whether the thing that we have put forward is safe and an acceptable thing to do. So that's why when we say we want to recruit, we are actively trying to recruit to fill all our vacancies, because that would be the best thing to do.
So have you actually sold the land now?
No.
But the bids have closed?
No, we've extended the whole process because we had the feedback very loud and clear which said we want you to ensure that there is affordable housing and potentially social care as part of the mix of the bids that come forward. So we had to write to everybody to say we've changed the brief, so we've extended the time that people have to bid for the land so that they hopefully can come back with some proposals that meet the requirement that we have been set. And we're now having active dialogue with Epsom Council, which is the planning authority for here, about a master plan for the Epsom site that would include those things as part of the master planning brief.
We cannot, I mean, I have to add at this point, we cannot instruct the planning committee as to what they will do. This is an independent procedure. So while you can make your intentions plain, and obviously we will support you in this, we cannot gainsay whatever the planning committee will do in this. It's independent.
So that is correct, but you have given us a pretty clear steer about what you think the council would like to see. Yes, and we are trying to ensure that what comes forward as a proposal is something that the council feels able to support, because that would make it considerably easier to progress.
David.
We're all very well aware that you are not alone in this country of suffering severe financial straits as a result of the 23 billion cut by 2020 demanded by the former President of Global Strategy for United Health, Simon Stevens, against the background that the government tells us that the budget for the NHS has not been reduced, it's actually been enhanced. So there's a difference here of at least 23 billion to account for. Can you confirm or deny that this 23 billion is what's going on the bureaucracy that's been set up under the Health and Social Care Act to dismantle and privatise the NHS?
Well, I don't think that anyone would say that £23 billion is being spent on bureaucracy at all. That would be ludicrous. I wouldn't agree with that.
But also, Dave.
Goes on admin now as against 2010.
Well, hang on. So, also, Dave, the questions you're asking us, we can't actually answer. We're not the national policy setters of the NHS or the government. We just run Epsom and St Helier Hospital. So, I can tell you that the percentage of our budget that we spend on management and admin has been coming down over time, and we have a pretty lean set of corporate functions. So, we have been investing as much money as possible into frontline patient care, which has been our strategy for several years, because that's the bit that's most important, that we have as many clinical staff as we conceivably can to treat patients well. That's the important bit locally.
Okay, Daniel, but you know as well as I do that the reason you are here is to carry forward the government's plan of cutting the NHS and privatising it, as is the case with Matthew Kershaw, who's just been appointed to Croydon.
No, I can be absolutely clear with you, Dave, that the reason why I'm doing this job is to ensure that we provide the best possible care for the 500,000 people that Epsom and St Helier serve, and we do it by every year improving the amount of money we can spend on clinical staff to provide clinical care, and we do it in the most cost-effective, the most joined-up way with all the other partners, and we're doing our best to make Epsom and St Helier an outstanding institution. That's what I'm here for, and that's what the whole board is for, and pretty confident that's what 5,000 staff who work in Epsom and Helier are for as well. Yeah.
Okay, so final question, and then we're going to be done.
Final question. I'm here to lobby Daniel Eccles, Nurse Demand Justice, and I'm going to hand this to Daniel Eccles of the treatment that I received from Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust. I'll hand it to all the directors, all that has happened to me, working at Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust for 20 years. And this is the treatment I've received from the trust. who's covering up stuff, hiding stuff. And I'm here to lobby Daniel Eccles that I need to get justice. I've written to you so much times and you ignore my emails and my letter. I'm coming to lobby now.
So Barbara, I know you've written to me lots of times. I also know that you have some really specific issues. I know that my team have investigated them really fully.
That's it.
And I believe we've got to the end of the process. So
No, it's not been the end of the process. I'll hand this to you. If you could put that on your COSH website for everybody to see what this trust is like.
So I think we have come to a place where we don't agree with each other.
We can't discuss any of this in a public forum.
Of the NHS
Sorry,
trust.
Barbara, we can't discuss any of this in a public forum. You're aware of
Yeah,
that.
it's a public forum when all the nurse has been treated very bad.
So we can't discuss this.
So
in
all
public.
I've
It's
given
not a
every one of
public
the
matter.
directors this stuff.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you next time.